It's good to be back on board of the Strategic Ark. So I would like to congratulate Director of PISM for organizing this conference, carrying the baton, and taking excellent title for all this conference, Navigating Uncharted Waters. At this stage, I have enormous pleasure to welcome and introduce to you veterans of Strategic Ark. Professor Eliot Cohen. There is a saying that some people need no introduction, but Henry Kissinger once said, but a few additional sentences would be very welcome. So, Eliot Cohen used to be a dean of Paul Nish School of Advanced International Studies, distinguished professor of Harvard, a counselor in George Bush administration to Condoleezza Rice in the State Department, and also quite recently a podcaster. So we are all here colleagues in this new world. Bulwark, congratulations, Eliot, for that. But Eliot also, I mentioned that Eliot delivered one of the first opening speeches to the Strategic Ark in 2022. Rajmund Andrzejczak, former chief of Polish defense, very experienced soldiers, a strategist, and now partner in crime, my partner in crime in podcast Ground Zero. Also a veteran of the Strategic Ark. So thank you, gentlemen, for accepting invitation of Polish Institute of National Affairs. And let me introduce the first topic of our conversation. You, Eliot, in 2022, in your speech, said that Russian aggression on Ukraine is a pivotal moment in the history of Europe, for the United States, and transatlantic relations as well. That this conflict would reshape our strategic environment for decades, probably. So, do you still believe that it is the case, that this conflict has been reshaping the strategic environment for decades? Actually, what has changed since 2002 when you were presenting your thoughts here from this stage?
Well, thank you. It's great to be back at Strategic Ark, and particularly with two dear friends. I think obviously it was going to be a watershed if you had not only the largest war in Europe in relative size since World War II, but a very large war that has cost over 1 million casualties, brought enormous destruction. It was bound to change things. I think the big questions at that time were, would the United States step up, and would Europe step up? And how would their relationship be changed during the course of the war? And it is clearly being changed. And I don't think it's simply because of the election of President Trump, who I agree with my friend Steve Biegun, is a very unconventional president. There's something much deeper here, which is about Europe taking responsibility for its own defense. But there's one other very big change. Obviously, right now, we tend to focus on, will there be a ceasefire? Will there be a peace negotiation? What might the contours of a deal be? Will go on for a year. I mean, the largest development here is most of the countries of Europe, particularly those closest to it, recognize that Russia is really seeking to overthrow the European security order, and that this is a challenge that goes beyond Ukraine. I was just in Sweden talking to senior Swedish defense officials. That became very clear. That is partly how they see this moment. It's not just about Ukraine, it's about them and the desire of Russia to essentially put them in the sphere of influence, to intimidate them. And that is the broader crisis that I think we're in now.
Now, I would like to ask Rajmund to provide his military opinion about this change, this new phase in the history of Europe. You were in charge in 2022 as a Polish chief of defense. Poland made a decision to provide crucial assistance to Ukraine. You will be giving hundreds of tanks, vehicles, ammunition. So actually, you were sacrificing your own potential for the sake of Ukraine. How, in your views, this change, this strategic change, looked like in that time, and what has changed since then?
Well, those good investments anyway. But first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. Always pleasure to be here, and I feel like in the family. So Sławomir is also a piece of you here. It's still deep in your heart. A secondary, big pleasure and honor for me to be with Eliot Cohen, one of the biggest strategic brains I know in one panel. Well, I would say as a soldier, nothing changed and everything changed. Depends on the perspective and context. If we're going, and especially being here with Eliot, if you look through the history from Peloponnesian War, you know, then Sun Tzu, Clausewitz, Napoleon, Piłsudski, whatever, we see what we know. It's the using military instruments in a certain way to make policy, make politics. So nothing new under sun. And from the other perspective, the time you mentioned as a chief of defense being just in the middle of those processes, I think everything changed. I have a couple of points. The first, which is interesting, my time of service in the Army was as a second lieutenant in 1991 and up to 2023. So entire processes. So I remember Russian threat as a scenario, as an option, as a hypothesis, or potentially happen, but luckily never happened. Now we see a completely different story. So the Russia physically used instruments close to the Polish border, killing people, invading full-scale operations. This is huge change. It's not for exercise, it's not scenario, it's for real. Second thing, from the very beginning, and I observe, it's determination matters. I mean, Ukraine nation standing in the line. You see, armed forces, reserves. You see entire nation fighting. You see big change in the production, territorial defense, and multi-domain issues. But also very much important, you see leadership. As a huge change to see a real leader leading country in a war, sometimes fighting on the battlefield, sometimes going to the Oval Office, another challenges. I think it's a huge inspiration for European leaders, and also in Poland. We are in the middle of election, so it's important. I would say, from a bigger perspective, NATO changed. I have some kind of challenges or even confusion. So war started. We have Madrid, and finally, Secretary General, he says, we have a strategic concept, saying Russia is enemy, finally. So I remember myself, 2018, when I was in Brussels Military Committee, we had a military strategy, the huge change to name the threat, because Russia, that time, 2018, was a competitor. So this is a huge change. And then we have Chris Cavoli, these soccer efforts to finally make regional plans, which was huge change, since the time when we remember the expeditionary forces. And he put absolute tremendous efforts to make it happen. I mean, signatures of all of those head of states to finally we have a regional plans. However, today, 2025, as a soldier I have confusion because we know that Russia is enemy. We have a agreement that we have plans, and at the same time, President Trump is challenging every day because he says, well, Russia is, you know what I mean. So Sweden and Finland is in NATO, which is, big change. And also, the most important is role of Poland. The easiest, the simple example is the phrase Eastern flank. For soldiers, Krzysztof, you agree, that all makes us, crazy. Because if I'm facing you, Eliot is my western flank, and Sławek is my eastern flank. You're in the front. So Poland was always in eastern flank. Actually, we are in eastern front. I know the phrase eastern front goes to some kind of bad relations, but this is a change right now. Everybody knows where the Poland is. Logistic hub, Polish investments, role of Poland, Kaliningrad, military mobility mentioned by Mr. Sikorski as well here. So I think this is a huge change.
Fantastic. That's exactly what I wanted to be after this first round of question. Because what you have already outlined is the following situation. The problem is there, and it's still the same as in 2022. We have already experienced different approaches. Rajmund mentioned that in 2015, 2016, so after 3 years after annexation of Crimea, we had this problem with vocabulary, how to name Russia. It was a political problem. It was a problem of political will. So next question to you, Eliot, would be, okay, how United States has changed to vis-a-vis the problem we have, because the problem is still the same. The war is still on. But Biden administration policy was different. The problem the same. First administration is different. Trump administration is very different, not only vis-a-vis Biden administration, but vis-a-vis the previous term of President Trump. So actually, the issue is what introduced us to uncharted waters? A problem or the policy?
Well, I think it's the problem that brought us into uncharted waters, and that is, a Russia that is not just predatory, but as I said, seeks to overthrow the European security order and, in some measure, reconstruct the old Russian Empire. And that's why I think it's very important to pay attention to the kinds of things that Foreign Minister Sikorski was talking about, say, in the Baltic, but also the kind of gray zone, hybrid warfare, sabotage, murder. I mean, it's a much larger threat, and it's a much larger threat in another way, which is something that was not nearly as clear in 2022, is the coalitional nature of the problem. In 2022, we weren't thinking, well, the Russians will be getting very substantial assistance from the Iranians, that there will be thousands of North Korean soldiers fighting in Europe. That is a staggering thought. It's amazing that we've just sort of normalized that China would be playing the role it is in terms of supplying a lot of the essential elements of the war machine. So the problem has gotten larger in a certain way. So that's one big change. With the Biden administration and Trump administration couldn't be more different. I've been very critical of both of them. But I think what you see with both of them in common is different degrees, different ways, a desire for Europeans to handle most, but not necessarily all of what is fundamentally a European security problem. I mean, in many ways, what we've seen, I think, across, particularly in this administration, is this is the culmination of long-standing American concerns about why a continent that is extraordinarily wealthy can't take care of the bulk of its own national security. And the point being that was made about, well, people are waking up and finding out that, say, Britain cannot deploy a brigade on a regular basis, one single brigade, not 110, not 10, one on a regular basis to Ukraine should tell us something. So, Trump has tapped that but it pre-existed that. I think at the end of the day, the United States does remain committed to NATO. I think that has been the message coming out of the Trump administration, and I tend to believe it. And I think Steve Biegun gave the audience here a lot of shrewd insights into how to think about the administration. But it does reflect some sort of deeper, longer-standing American concerns. And what this means is that we should not treat this as something to get hysterical about, something to get despairing about. The question is, what will Europe now do? And the point is, the future is very much in the hands of European leaders.
Okay, I will reframe a little bit the same question to Rajmund, but I would, to make it a little bit more difficult.
Let's challenge me.
Because one may say that Poland didn't experience the same, let's say, policy shift like the United States. So no matter who is in charge in Poland, what government is in charge, we are very much behind Ukraine, and we are, sending stuff to Ukraine. We are supporting Ukrainians in the fight against the Russian invasion. But the function of our policy in 2022, which we tried to force the hand of the other allies. In other way, we tried to bring them on board of helping Ukraine. And now seems to be a little bit different. There is a coalition of willing, which are determined to support Ukraine, even if United States are hesitating. What actually unites this, Polish attitudes, previous and this government? What actually is behind this policy, and why this function of our policy vis-à-vis other allies has changed?
It's always risky or difficult when you taken out from context in certain presidency and are trying to assess and compare. Biden was slightly different stage of perception, different stage of readiness, political readiness, also social one, and Trump as well. So it's not one-to-one, but I would describe in the simplest way that Biden was just like, I don't want to say paralyzed, but heavily influenced by escalation issue. Because there was that time of mental readiness, and everybody was crazy. Russians pushed the button. Although they had the money, resources, capability to send more equipment on time, there was always, some discussion, some concerns about the consequences and escalating to the nuclear level. What I assess as a pretty effective Russian, deterrence. It was, no matter what, effective. And then Trump, there's a craziness of negotiations, making deals and outcomes. So it's like problems with ways, how he approached, and then there was issues of will to support on time, properly. But you touched an interesting point, the role of Poland, because we're sitting just in the middle. I remember, because that was my time in the position of Chief of Defense, when and everybody was the most, diplomatic, very skeptical about this, support of Ukraine. Poland, the president of Poland met Zelensky a few days before war. Then, prime ministers going to the Kiev. Then we're opening, borders for millions of Ukrainians coming. Then there's those fundamental social, behaving, which matters, because anywhere I go to the United States, everybody knows, okay, Poles, they are different, they're unique, because they really want to help Ukraine. Then we started support, and then, we escalated, to be honest. Okay, send tanks, send Western, production tanks, send MiGs, send F-16s and HIMARSs, everything. So I think the role of Poland, I don't want to overestimate, but it was pretty influential in the region, pushing, Germany, pushing France. Remember the first comments of Macron in the beginning of war was slightly different or far away from current, narratives. So I think we feeling much more comfortable right now somehow, and then no matter how how many tickets to the train those four gentlemen and how they organized the trip to Kiev. But in the end of the day, we have a Poland inside the business, and then it's still question about our idea and our strategy for the next phase. But I think there was some kind of role that Poland played in the case of US. How should we change the system from not being as crazy and paralyzed by escalation and going to much more pragmatic approach? That's my feeling.
The Strategic Ark was initiated to produce recommendations for the decision makers. So this is quite a unique place. We are not talking about let's say state of the affairs, but we are meant to produce something useful in terms of our ideas, in terms of recommendations. So now we are in this part of our conversation. So we know the problem is created by Russian aggression on Ukraine. The policies have been adapting, sometimes changing. That's the challenge. We are hearing from the Washington that, well, this Russia is not so strong, that actually Europeans should deal with it alone or predominantly by ourselves. So the question to both of you would be, first, can Europe defend itself? That's one thing. Another thing, what Europe should do to be an attractive ally for the United States?
So, I think any European approach should be grounded on the assumption that the United States, almost no matter what, is going to want to shift its attention to China. That's our biggest challenger. In many ways, it's getting bigger because of a number of things that we ourselves have done, but fundamentally because of China. So in a certain way, Europe has no choice. Does Europe have the financial resources and the people? Of course. The question is, does it have the will? I very much take Minister Sikorsky's point that defense budgets have doubled and they may double again. That's great, but that's from a base of virtual disarmament, not of Poland, but of a lot of other countries.
And the GDP alone doesn't stop Russian tanks.
Absolutely not. I mean, if you look at what Japan was able to do to the United States for the first year, 2 years of the Second World War, and was doing that with the GDP that was, I think, like about 10, 12% that of the United States. And I think even though we talk about Russian weakness, we should not underestimate the advantages they get by being a unitary actor, by the advantage of being utterly ruthless, having no scruples whatsoever, and just simply by virtue of their undeniable military ability. So I'd say the first thing is, does Europe have the capacity? Absolutely. What does it have to do? It really has to arm itself and be serious about doing it at the right speed. I think there are immediate tasks, I think, for Poland, and perhaps we should talk about that later. I think for Europe, the thing to do now is to work out an agreement with the United States that will allow the United States to draw down somewhat in Europe, because that's coming, and to continue to shift its focus to the Indo-Pacific, but to do it in such a way that is not disruptive, so that the trajectories more or less align. And I think to the greater extent that European leaders can say, we get it, we understand that you're not willing to play the same role that you played throughout most of the 20th century, and that's appropriate. It's not only we understand it, but we support it. Let us work together to kind of harmonize this so it's effective, and we remain allies at the end of it.
Rajmund, can Europe defend itself now?
Well,
and what it should do to be capable to do so in future?
Well, of course, I will use the maneuver that Stephen began perfectly. So I will have a short version and then still keeping my time for coffee. So last 300 years, more or less, academically telling, that we presented that it's possible. You know, there was the First Republic, there was a Crimean War, there was a few times the Smolensk, there were Ottoman Empire, France, Austrians, and Napoleon, everybody else. So the only last 80 years of history, everything depends on U.S. contribution from different reasons, because Europe was completely destroyed. So it is not example to implement, but it's a kind of an inspiration. You know, it's helpful for us to say, well, it's possible. And I'm agree with Eliot that we have a couple of criteria, depending on, the criteria. You say a time, which is crucial. So, well, Europe needs at least 1 decade to be ready, really, more or less. Of course, it's academic discussion, 5 years, 7, depending on speed. But today, although I have a full respect, and I totally agree that GDP is not the issue, that we change, we double GDP, we're increasing production, but it's not necessarily our readiness. So time is working for Russia. If Russia will be ready for the next 3 years to build something what I call crisis potential, it will be difficult. So we are not ready, and we need the United States to give us a time. So it's not like I was mentioning Tallinn, okay, we're withdrawing tomorrow, and that's up to you. We have to synchronize. The second thing is military capability, nuclear or conventional. Nuclear, of course, it will be very difficult. However, let's exercise, as the Krzysztof always said, massage intellectually, 300 warheads in France and 5,500 Russians. It's a huge difference. But let's imagine the situation that you have a really 300 and you have a capability, you have a political will, you have a policy, you're exercising, you're communicating to the enemy, I'm going to use it. 300, it'll be painful. So it's not about time, but we need 5,000 additional warheads, and then Russians say, well, that's fine, it's the balance of nukes. I don't believe. So this is still room for improvement for us, and Poland is doing good steps, talking to the France and also Brits, that even President Trump to realize the Brits, they have nuclear weapons. So conventionally, for sure, I'm agree. There's no complaints, don't cry, increase everything possible, and I think it's doable. You know, increasing production, maybe some different approach, WS technology, not necessarily heavily, sophisticated, expensive weapons, maybe some affordable, achievable, technologies and capabilities. And the biggest challenge, Sławek, for me is Eliot's political will. This is the first question we should put. Are we politically willing and are ready to defend alone, or we have some issues?
Do you have any recommendations how to shape this political will actually in Europe? Because one may say that for last, let's say, 75 years, particularly for democratic Europe, this political will was shaped by the United States, by its leadership. The question is, what if this leadership is shaken? Or at least, this leadership doesn't know the direction of sailing. So how to shape this European will behind the force we need?
So I think, you may be being a little bit unfair to the earlier generation of European statesmen who were very clear about the nature of the Soviet threat, and after all, are the ones who orchestrated Western Europe's rise out of the ashes of the Second World Wars. And there's no particular reason why you couldn't have, maybe statesmen of that caliber from that generation, but it could also, we had somebody like Manfred Werner, who was a remarkable German statesman who articulated, I think, very clearly what was at stake. So this is not beyond the ability of political leaders to do it. What it requires is, to remind publics about what the Russians are doing and what they have done. The one problem, because the way the war has rolled on, forget about Bucha and Irpin and all the other hideous atrocities. People need to be reminded of that, of what happens when the Russians roll in. It is not enough, I think, to just say, oh, you know, it's terrible that there was a mysterious warehouse fire, which is not mysterious, or that somebody tried to kill the head of Rheinmetall, and that was probably not an accident. But to, you know, to confront the fact that Russia is conducting a kind of aggressive hybrid warfare, if that's the term you want to use, of a kind that we really didn't see in the Cold War in Europe. I mean, they did bad things, but violent things, you know, really lethal things, not nearly as much as they're doing now. So this is very much in the lap of political leaders, you know, opinion makers of all kinds, the press, and so on.
Okay, Rajmund, you, of course, you had this experience of generating public support for armed forces, for rising expenditure, for defense. So, what would be your recommendation? How to shape this? Absolutely, you know, key element of any democratic policy, that people are behind it, that people want it, that there is a democratic demand towards the politician to deliver. How to do that?
Well, the mobilizing society in Poland is not the issue, because we're absolutely unique. We have a political guidance, we have economical affordability, and we have, I mean, you know, money, and then we have social acceptance, which is pretty unique. So this is not the challenge to mobilize, to explain for Poles to follow this idea. I think absolutely critical will be offensive diplomacy, talking to US for sure. Not offensive, I mean criticizing. I would say if the situation requires that you should know how to play the golf, let's learn to play the golf like President of Finland, and maybe that'll be effective, because the Trump, after, you know, telephones, is calling, you know, Ursula von der Leyen, you know, he's calling Macron, and he's calling to Finland. So it is a matter of tactics and how to approach. So we have to change a little bit, and trying also to understand the U.S. perspective, which I think a little bit missing here in Europe. For sure, you know, promoting role of Poland will be crucial here. We discussed in the program, and I think it resonates pretty well, to change a little bit narratives in Poland to, okay, we're spending 5% GDP, 300,000 army, F-35s, you know, Patriots and M1 tanks, and we solve the problem. So 50% of our strategy should be focused on short war. That's what we call short war, to preventing, to deter. If we are good enough, it will be painful and very difficult for Russians to make decision, okay, let's take a piece of terrain. That's pretty clear. And then we have long war, which means we have to be ready for 3 months, for 6 months, for 1 year, and to the end of, you know, civilization, to fight, which we see in Ukraine, which requires, you know, political guidance, some kind of explanation, and it will be deterrence itself, because if we send the Russians, okay, that's our option. We're gonna kill you, or it will be painful very first day, first hour. But if we are not successful, which is always possible, if we finally get alone, we are ready for long war. So balancing between short war and long war, still, and accepting in a social level, that's the resilience, will be crucial and critical. And also it will be, I think, very well welcome in US, we as a, you know, credible alliance. So that'll be interesting, you know, recommendation.
So now, you know, in 10 minutes, in let's say 5-10 minutes, I will open the floor for a question. But the last comment of Rajmund leads me to Eliot once again. So Rajmund offered us some, you know, quite concrete recommendations how Poland should behave in this shaky relationship with Trump's administration, how it should invest in its own potential. Do you have any recommendation for the Polish leadership, how they should react? You know, in 1 week time we have elections in this country. We elect president, as you probably know, and a new guy in the presidential palace may need some hints what he should do first.
So, you know, I mean, given the state of American politics, the idea of turning to an American to give advice to Polish politicians seems a little bit odd to me. But let me address it. You know, when I used to come to Poland, what I used to hear a lot of was, "We told you so," which is true. You abandoned us at Yalta. We can argue about that, but I understand the point. Now you get more of, okay, we will do this, we're not going to do that. And I think those are all insufficient. And to some extent, the first two are not useful at all, and by and large, you don't hear that much of that anymore. What I think the issue for Poland is how Poland wishes to assert leadership. You now have the biggest army, and in many ways the best army in Europe. I don't think that's going to change. I mean, I don't think the Germans are going to build 5 divisions anytime soon. Nobody doubts your resolve. You've got a very strong economy. How are you going to lead? Are you going to push for changes to NATO? Are you going to try to assert local leadership? I thought Minister Sikorski was very interesting on the Baltic Sea, Council of Baltic Sea States, where I think there are real issues. Do you think that some of the future of NATO has to be a bit more in the way of regional groupings? Because let's face it, you know, the Czech Republic is going to be much more interested in Russia. Spain and Portugal are going to be much more interested in North Africa, and that's not unreasonable. So I think there needs to be thinking for Poland in this much broader context where you're making some choices about how you assert yourselves. You weren't made a member of the E4 because that's like a little red ribbon you get for having a defense budget of a certain size. It's because you're now in a position to lead, and that really means exercising choices that go beyond, well beyond, saying we do this, we don't do that.
So it sounds like it's two different propositions. I mean, playing the game and leading in the game. So I mean, I think the clear choice ahead of Poland. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have any question, just let me know by raising your hands. Please introduce yourself. You know, let's start from the second row. We will go farther and farther.
Alina Frolova, Ukraine Center for Defense Strategies. Thank you for the really interesting discussion, and I have like 2 questions, one to general probably, and the another to Eliot. The to general, you know that if you want to have a successful operation, you need to establish a joint command for operation. You obviously, like Europe, has now threats from Russia. It's not only threats, it's already like activated in Baltics, in hybrid warfare, and potential threats of attack. But I don't see any joint command, Tiger groups, whatever, established to address jointly, whatever, NATO, just like a local alliance of the countries, like-minded countries, to address those threats, because we're speaking not only about the military capabilities, but also about logistic routes, which are completely not ready in Europe, production, full-on war, which is not ready and not addressed, the establishment of reserve, for example, for drones operation, which can be established, but not here yet. So do you see some appetite or discussions in European military or political circles? And the second, this is about readiness of Europe, of young generation especially, to be part of the war. And I think that a lot of things which could be done now to activate it, and including this like establishment of reserve, which can be more attractive for young generation, especially if this is like some kind of innovation warfare. What would be your recommendation, how you address this problem, how to activate in advance generation which would be ready to fight if something will happen? Thank you.
Rajmund?
Well, it's difficult to say whether it's appetite or not, and we should not focus to make the topic attractive, but just to force politicians to do it. So more discussions, more determination, more social understanding, and Poland, or going to the Western direction as well, will be helpful. So we should not focus about finding sexy terms and lovely, for anybody, because security is not a product. It's not something that you can put in your mobile phone and take it or buy it. So I would say more pragmatic, very fair discussion about the consequences of not investing, not being proactive is absolutely crucial. Young generation, well, I'm 1.5 years in retirement, and I met 3 groups of people. First was the business, and still is business, and talking, understanding their approach. The second is academics, and the third one is young generation. My first recommendation is just talk and mostly listen to. This is nothing, I would not overestimating that the young generation is bad, they don't understand, they just want to put to the TikTok and living in the lovely conditions. This is huge social transformation, so you cannot talk to the young generation in the old language, from the Cold War. So I think anywhere I go to the young generation, and I'm listening to carefully, and we have agreement always. Okay, I'm telling what I think about, but then I will listen to you carefully how you understand. So I think it's missing. So definitely in the public domain, and there's a huge potential. They are different, maybe not so physically fit, maybe much more addicted to the new technologies, but still has a huge energy, and I'm optimistic. But we have to change the language and listen to carefully what the young generation are talking about. And I always say, when I was in Sweden one time and talking to Mikael, the chief of defense of Sweden, and he said, Ray, we just screw up everything because all of the things concerning globalization, this is our responsibility. We brought the world with globalization, Facebook, Twitter, all of the things. They had no choice. They just burn and find out themselves in the world we created. So now we need some time to listen to carefully and to find a platform for communication.
So on the second point, I may disagree a little bit. I think there's a big difference between Western Europe and East and Central Europe. I think if you live in this part of the world, you know that your freedom isn't free. And you know what it's like not to be free, and you know what it's like to be on the losing end of a war, and that war is a reality. I think in Western Europe, the tremendous success of the European Union and all the things that had preceded it somehow lured people into a belief that we had moved into a completely different era of human history. And people are going to have to be disabused of that view. I'm a teacher by profession, and I think one thing that sometimes alarms me is how little history the next generation is being taught, just history. And I think that's probably the entering way into this, because history is a very sobering discipline, if you look at it. And I think a younger generation, particularly in Western Europe, needs to be sobered.
Well, actually, thank you for this opportunity.
It will not be easy.
You've been discussing the political will of others, so I would like to press you on ours. General Andrzejczak, can you explain to me and to the audience why a country who has declared itself a major military player and a strategic leader in NATO and Europe spent so much effort ruling out engagement in what could be NATO and Europe's most important military mission ahead. While, you know, in the past, and you've been part of it, it has sent troops to places like Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq, or even Chad. And to Mr. Cohen, does the United States understand the Polish position? Thank you.
Well, I'm not sure what I get you right about the Poland, and we're spending too much energy for. If you could explain it a bit more.
For not sending, to explaining to the others that we are not going to contribute.
Right. Not sending in troops. Okay. Well, I will describe from a very military perspective what we're doing today. It will be useful for everybody else to compare. Look at the map and you see the Poland, which is absolutely critical from a strategical point of view. Main Highway 1 from Moscow to Warsaw and then to Berlin, Paris, and so on is going across Brest and going to Warsaw. You know it very well from conventional point of view. So if we're sending 18th Division anywhere else, Russia will be happy, and who's going to take this job for us? Now, that's the most important strategical hub for, any kind of operation, full scale, below threshold, hybrid, whatever we say. It's easy. Then we have a Kaliningrad. Who's going to take care about Kaliningrad? With all of the respect to Lithuanian army and, perfect soldiers and all of the leadership. Poland, 16th Division, is facing Kaliningrad, and we are responsible not only because the Constitution, but also because the NATO plans to fix the Russian forces in Kaliningrad and not allow them to do anything we don't like. Then we have logistic hub in Rzeszów, which is probably, this is pretty well known. So once our units are focused on Rzeszów and keep it in the peacetime, from Polish perspective, and then a crisis, and potentially in the future when we have reconstruction, rebuilding of Ukraine, the logistic hub in Rzeszów will be absolutely crucial. 100% of support is going through the Rzeszów, and is going to be in the future as well. Then we have a Świnoujście, node, and Szczecin, also absolutely important. We are responsible as a country for military mobility, all of those forces gathering in Germany, going to Baltic states. If we not keep it open, they're gonna die. They're gonna die. It is not possible technically to support Operation Baltic States through the maritime domain. And then, if that was mentioned a few times today, if there's any no-fly zone concept on the table, there will not be air operation from Lithuania, Latvia, or Estonia, or from Romania or Germany. We know it very well. It's, is the military DNA. It will be from Poland. So that's the point probably missing when we're explaining that this is not lack of bravery or political will, but we have already so many important obligations and missions to fulfill that nobody else is ready to replace. And the brigade or division from Spain or British division will go to Warsaw and keep this Brest gate closed. It is not possible. So I think, the answering your questions is that's the missing, that kind of explanation in the political level, and then the impression is, well, the Poles are not ready to go to Ukraine because of the lack of bravery.
So I'm afraid I'm going to annoy my friend General Andrzejczak. That was a brilliant description of operational realities. In strategy, there's often this tension between operational realities and political logic. I can't speak for all Americans, obviously, but from this American's point of view, and I think from the point of view of many American national security experts, it looks odd that Poland is not willing to commit forces to Ukraine in the event of the deployment of some European force. During the Cold War, the United States kept a force known as the Berlin Brigade in Berlin. It was about 10,000 troops strong. It was a first-rate unit. It was a very high prestige assignment. They were well trained for urban combat, and they were completely surrounded by the Warsaw Pact. And if there was going to be a war, they were probably going to be lost. But it was very important to have the Berlin Brigade there throughout the Cold War, because what it told the Russians is, you know, if you try to take West Berlin, you are at war with the United States, you're at war with NATO. That's really, I think, when people talk about the deployment of forces to Ukraine, that's what they are there for. If they are there as, quote, peacekeepers, that makes no sense. That peacekeeping, that's for patrolling the lines in Cyprus. But Ukraine is in Cyprus. The reason why you would deploy serious forces to Ukraine would be so that the Russians know that if they try it again, they will be at war with the rest of Europe and probably with all of NATO as well, even if American forces are not part of that. The one last thing I'll say is what we also heard from Poles is, well, we will think about it if American forces are there too, which indicates that this is a political calculation as well as anything else. But the political logic and the operational logics here, I think, unfortunately, are at odds with each other. And actually, Slavik, I'd be curious to know your view.
Yes, I will.
So if I may, because the topic is extremely important, I would add additional comment. It's a kind of paradox. We send the troops, I'm in Poland, send the troops to Iraq and Afghanistan, combat mission with guns, with real threat. I was young, just newly promoted to colonel rank and commander of BCT in Afghanistan. There was a fighting every day, guns, troops in contact, closer support, IEDs and everything. And it was socially accepted. So the army is an instrument, and at that time we used this instrument. With all of the respect, the soldiers I lost in the battle, I still have a cemetery in my heart. But you know, I don't want to mix emotions, tactics, and strategy and politics. So now is the point that we have to ask ourselves: do we really want to play the critical role in the region? If we do, okay, let's concern unthinkable things. So if the national interest requires send the troops, let's concern it. So we have to prepare ourselves for such a scenario, but not only in the panic say, well, never, never, because we have presidential, elections or next elections, because there are always elections. So I think it's a good point for some kind of intellectual massage to consider.
I would add to that two excellent responses. The following thought. It's very difficult to contribute force to the mission which is undefined in terms of goals, which actually is fictional. Because I see the leaders of countries who are contributing forces, they don't have it. If you, and Rajmund can correct me if I'm wrong, if you are serious about sending a brigade, it means that you have 3 brigades ready. 1 in preparation, 1 ready for rotation. So taking into account our operational responsibility, we have to care about, it's a big deal. I don't see Brits having 3 brigades ready to go. I don't see France having 3 brigades ready to go. And there is one very important element. All these talks is not serious. It's not serious enough. So once we learn about political conditions of this mission, once we have truth to support, to start with.
Because we have a plan. There's no plan.
Then you can come to us and we will deliberate how we can help you. And probably one of the last questions, the lady in the 4th row. Yes.
Thanks very much. Victoria Leukowicz, Swedish Institute of International Affairs. My question is about the upcoming military exercises between Russia and Belarus, which are planned mainly to take place on the Belarusian territory. How does Poland and US see these exercises? What could be the strategical implications of them for regional security and NATO's eastern flank? Thanks.
Can you repeat your question, because
about the Russian exercise in Belarus?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So what is their strategical implications for regional security and for NATO's eastern flank?
If I may, there's nothing new. The Russians are always doing the exercises in Belarus, so we're getting used to. And again, it's like a tactical, operational dimension, and then it's political messaging, depending on how the Russians really want to play the role in this exercise. It's very dangerous, but again, it should be our argument to explain and other countries that's still not paying 2% GDP, we agree 10 years ago, that if we're not spending enough time, enough money, the exercise in Belarus give us no time for reaction. And I'm always bringing an example from Israel. The last time the Israeli defense forces were able to shut down all of the drones flying across desert going to the territory of Israel. They had hours for preparation, and then I had the access to shut down far away from territory of Israel. In Poland, if we have exercises close to Brest, we have no time, we have minutes. And that's the Polish message. We're taking seriously what they're doing in the political dimension, and telling to other partners, and especially when I'm explaining no 2% GDP countries, what's the consequence will be about.
So just two things. One, I did want to just tie up the rest of it. I completely agree with you, Slavik. All I'm saying is, I think it would be helpful if Poland didn't rule anything out to begin with, because you don't know what other European states will be doing. And that actually leads me to the second response. You used the phrase NATO's eastern flank. Even our sense of geography has to change. NATO has a northern flank now, too. And it has, in some ways, a sort of a southeastern flank. I mean, one of the challenges, and I think this is an area where Poland can exercise some kind of strategic intellectual leadership, is reconceptualizing how we think about the geography of the defense of Europe against Russia.
Okay, so I would just respond, tell us, Washington, D.C., what your policy would be towards Ukraine, Russia, and the truth there, and you can come out to us, and we will see how we can help you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, please, time is up, unfortunately. Please join me in thanking our distinguished, wonderful panelists.
Thank you for this interesting exchange. Sławomir, please join us here for a brief overview of the discussion.
Thank you, pleasure.
So, what image of the transatlantic community emerged from this conversation, in your opinion? Is it optimistic, or rather should we be afraid?
I think we should not focus ourselves and our thinking too much on emotions. The message from both gentlemen was quite clear. Focus on what you can do, what's up to you. Invest in your capabilities. Be strong, and then you will be much less afraid of hesitations in the White House or in the Oval Office about what to do. So actually, good allies are those allies who are strong, who are capable, who can actually defend themselves.
I would like to follow up a little bit on those recommendations. So you mentioned the lack of political will among some of the Westerners. Did any particular take on how to make our strategy better stood out for you?
Well, there were many interesting thoughts. I enjoy very much Rajmund's kind of the tactical hints. So once a Polish president is elected, he should invest his time to learn golf. You need tools to talk to Donald Trump, and if you don't have it, just build it.
I remember all previous editions of the PISM Strategic Ark, and we were talking a lot about tempo and timing. Can we be satisfied this time with how fast we are adapting to the circumstances?
Well, to give credit where credit is due, I think Europe is adapting to the new circumstances. I mean, I would say that in some elements, this adaptation process is faster than we had expected, in 3 years ago. The issue of 155 millimeter ammunition was mentioned by Minister Sikorski. Well, it's not the issue anymore. So it means that during the last 3 years, we did something. We improved our stockpiles. And so Europe is getting ready. Of course, the time is of the essence. We need to harmonize two processes. I mean, Europe's preparing itself to the new mission, and this mission would be, no matter who is in charge in the White House, this mission would be defending peace in Europe on your own. Of course, we have to work with American allies, but we also need to hear them. They say that they are overstretched. They need to focus on Pacific, and Russia is weak. That's the message which is coming from America quite often, more and more often. So there is no need to American engagement in Europe because Russia is weak.
Excellent conclusion. Sławomir, thank you very much once again for being with us.